So on that note, I'm very pleased to be introducing Phil Veldhuis, our speaker tonight. Phil is from a large extended beekeeping family and was put to work as a teenager pulling honey every summer. People with this experience and working on farms generally typically become beekeepers or stay in school long enough for an easier career. Phil did both. He is now a full-time beekeeper and a part-time instructor at the University of Manitoba, teaching both agriculture and philosophy. When we asked Phil to speak, there was this period of discussion where the question was, what out of all the possible topics Phil could cover would be chosen? We could have done queen rearing, mite control, overwintering, and the list goes on, really. Phil does cover these topics as Phil the Bee Man on his YouTube channel, though, so you can all check that out. But Phil chose to focus on the summer splits he makes in August with a talk titled, Why We Need to Make Summer Splits. And as Phil justified this, he said to me, I'm becoming somewhat evangelical about this method, as I think this is what our industry needs. He will discuss when and how he makes his summer splits with excess bees and the reasons why he thinks they are important to a sustainable bee industry in Canada. So please join me in welcoming Phil Veldhuis. Thanks. Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Is this going to turn on, Brad? Or the projector? Oh. Okay. I feel like this is a little hot now, but we'll do our best. So and Ian and I are going to have coffee sometime and really figure out what we're really calling this thing, because there's a few tags on the table, but the words I came up with this afternoon. But I'm calling it pre-replacement hives. But I've also got a different name for later in the presentation. But really what I'm thinking is we're at a point, beekeeping has become really hard. When I was a kid, you could pull the crop, throw a pail of syrup on the hives, go hunting, come back 1st November, put them in the shed, and you'd get 5-6% losses. And now, our industry kind of baked into the funding program formulas we're looking at, it's kind of like 30% is the benchmark, both for the crop insurance, winter survivability, and some of the compensation program we had earlier this year. They were indexed on a 30% loss as kind of being the expected loss. Well, that's tough to make up. And so that's one of the reasons I think that our industry, we've been struggling a little bit, and why something like, Ian saying, well, let's talk about the border at coffee time. It's controversial because there's not enough hives to go around come springtime. So I'll just do this real quick, but we all know what a Manitoba winter is like, and also what a Manitoba summer is like. And they come at you, it seems, faster and faster. And so how do we deal with the fact that we don't have the advantages of a long season the way most of the rest of the world does? So we have to have unique solutions for ourselves. So we have this very intense spring build up, which on my operation historically, nearly all the actual technical beekeeping happens in about 5 weeks starting around May 1st. And that's when the queens get found, the splits get made, the hives get equalized. All of that really technical beekeeping happens in that very short window. And the rest of the time I'm stacking boxes. So the pressure's on the beekeeping skill, and I need to spread that over a longer portion of the year. So the very narrow windows. And when we split, and this is no surprise to anyone, but you're taking those best hives and you're spreading those bees over more area. And if your hives are good, you need to do that for swarm control. But if your hives aren't that strong, or if you've lost a ton of hives, as many of us have had over the last few years, you end up splitting them maybe just a little too thin, and then you get very little crop. You maybe get your numbers back, or maybe if you have terrible losses, you might not even get your numbers back off of your strong hives. Because my experience is that if you've got a 50% winter loss, the hives you have left are no great shakes either. It's not like you lose half and half of them are totally normal. If you're gonna have a bad winter loss, the hives you got left are also terrible. And so you're looking to make more splits than you ever have before, and there's nothing to work with. So I think there's a risk of being entirely reliant on spring splits, of essentially writing off your whole crop just to maintain your hive numbers. And it's a terrible decision to make. Do you either buy in bees or split too thin, either of which are going to have serious financial implications for your hives, or you know, if you're a smaller beekeeper, you're going to, well, I guess we're not extracting any honey this year, and all my friends and neighbors are going to find new beekeepers to hang out with, and they'll forget about me. So this is some of the problem I'm trying to solve. When you're making splits in the spring, you're on your knees and it's cold, although here I am in shorts. But you end up making these small hives and you're working frame by frame. And I feel like I'm probably a pretty decent queen finder, but there's the odd one that'll just kill an hour to make one split. And so it's really hard to scale that up. How do you get more productive when you've got to check every single stupid bee in that hive to find that darn queen? And you're trying to do this when every night in early May, when it's actually the best time to do it. The hives aren't too populous yet, but if you split that hive and you make any mistaken judgment on the population, either chill brood or they drift back to the parent hive, there's all kinds of ways, because quite frankly, it's going to go down to almost freezing every night till mid-May. And it only has to go down to freezing once in any 21-day brood cycle to set you back again, because that cluster will shrink. Now, our beekeeping in Manitoba, and my family for 100 years had no shame about, if we had a tough winter, getting extra bees. You'd phone up the bee supply desk at Bee Made and say, well, I remember my grandmother, and I've got all her notes from the 40s and 50s. She would say, well, you know, it was a tough winter, so I ordered 20 extra packages. And then the next year, maybe she wouldn't need any. And we had this incredibly abundant resource of bees coming from much more moderate climates. And so, if you've ever been or you've watched videos of the way those guys make their packages, they're not looking for individual queens. Those bees go into those orchards in California or in Florida or Georgia, and they're just booming with bees after 2 months of good flow. And they just take a whole honey super and just shake it over the funnel, and there's a package. And it's that kind of scale and that kind of ease of beekeeping that I've been seeking. Not because I don't like beekeeping. I love those days in May. I love sitting on a box by a hive and finding that queen. But there's only so many days. And some days it rains, some years it rains every day. So, and then if you're going to say, well, the other good source for bees is a local nuke from another beekeeper, and I'm happy to sell them. But that's not really solving the problem. That's just offloading the work onto a different beekeeper. And is relying on the same pool of bees we all have here in Manitoba. So you need a nuke, you're getting it from someone else. That person had to do that work, had to have those bees. So it's not really a solution to the global problem, and that's maybe getting the philosophy part of things a bit too much, maybe. So I want to scale up the way those package bees guys, where they can make hundreds of packages a day with relatively unskilled labor, working very fast, doing the same job again and again and again. So now we'll get into, he gave me a pointer here, so I better use it. Well, that's a felt pen. Here it is. Look at that. Okay, so this is weather from, I forget what year, but 2021, and it's a fairly typical year. So the typical window to split bees is in that May, trending into about the first week, maybe even the second week of June. And any split you don't have made by then, it's not going to make any honey. You can make more hives, but you're not going to get much of a crop. And I'm thinking about this window here where the weather is actually quite a bit warmer, especially the lack of cold nights. Not especially warmer during the day, but you're getting overnight lows at the worst case of 6 or 8 degrees instead of 0. That's a heck of a difference actually for your hives. And you guys all know this graph. I think you spent some time at your last class. It's like, I feel like I'm teaching a follow-up lecture here. But, I've superimposed that weather on this build-up graph and comparing it to the window I'm targeting. So we all know about the weather. And of course, if you split too late in here, then you don't get that mountain of bee growth. And that's what, of course, the population is what makes your crop if the flowers are there when the bees are there. So my thinking is, well, let's let the bees build up. We'll make the splits we need to manage the populations. But I'm going to target the end of the summer for my growth splitting, for my anticipation of future needs of my bees. And so in the spring, I'll let the bees tell me what they're able to do. I can make the bees later. And we start thinking about that autumn or maybe midsummer pollen feed availability. It's going to be kind of sketchy on the nectar flow, but it looks like actually for pollen flows, there's lots, which is why everyone's hay fever is terrible in August. So there's pollens from grasses and thistles and ragweed and pigweed that aren't part of the mix earlier. Lots of good pollen flows in May and June coming off the trees, but there's lots of stuff in the ditches that'll have pollen for you in that August. So you will have something for those bees to build on. And I already see some skeptical faces. I remember one time when I was a kid, Pete Peters came out to the Brandon Beekeepers Association to tell the beekeepers, including some of my relatives, about running singles. And the general discussion at the coffee time was that he needed to be thrown in the horse trough because no one can ever run singles in Manitoba. Double brood chambers was the only possible way. And of course we know that that isn't true, but it only took us 50 years to accept that. So I got 50 years. Beekeepers in my family hit 100 all the time, so I'm only halfway there. But why you're thinking is Phil as crazy as he looks? Because you've got enough to do in August. That's already back-breaking work. And it really doesn't matter if you've got one hive or 1,500, you've already got too much work. Why would you add more work in August? And you also might be thinking, I don't think those bees are going to brood up. or all the bees in those hives are old and worn up, they've just made a honey crop, they're not going to make a good hive. And obviously, if it's too late to make a split by June, for sure it's too late to make a split in August. You're not going to get a crop off of that. So those are all, I think, very good reasons to think that I'm full of it. And I will attempt to argue that I might not be completely wrong. So first of all, the labor, the workload problem. Totally agree, and it's taken me honestly a lifetime to only partly solve that. And as you know, those of us in the room are pretty keen on our easy loaders and how much work they save. That was a big part of this for me as a large beekeeper. Now, if you only have a small number of hives, well, then you need a grandchild or a nephew or something, the way my grandmother did it, right? She didn't have a workload problem. She had a progeny solution. So I recommend that to you. So you either get an easy loader or a grandchild. Probably cost about the same in the long run. But even if you have that, you've only solved half the problems because you still need to get the splitting process integrated into your honey production, because that's all you got time for in August. You're in honey production mode. If something doesn't fit into what you're doing, it's not going to work. So I'm calling this now my KISS split, for keep it simple split, or you can put some other word for S there if you want. And so this is what I'm going to pitch you on. And a couple things you need to know before I do this. So we got two critical tools, at least for me. So these yellow bands in these hives are bee escapes. And of course, my easy loader has lifted all those boxes up, and I've put empties underneath. And and I've had an easy loader now, I think, for 15 years. Every single stack I put on the truck, I click my heels and I feel so good about getting that much work done for that little effort. It's unbelievable. The feeling of liberty is, I just can't say enough good about that. But I know that it's not for everyone. And then the other critical tool is the queen excluder. I run singles, so every hive has a queen excluder above the brood chamber where the queen is. And as long as she stays there, you don't need the finder. So that's another critical aspect of this. So I'll place the bee escapes with an easy loader, and I'm coming back 3 days to load the honey onto the truck. With this method, I'm not going to have to find queens. I'm not going to handle a single frame. And you might be thinking, well, if you're not handling frames, how are you going to make sure they have brood? And I'm not even going to worry about that. There's no brood involved in this at all. And you might be thinking, okay, Phil, now you're really crazy because bees won't stay in those boxes without brood. And even if they did, they would be too weak because they need fresh bees hatching all the time to be viable. Well, let's go through the process. So when I set up, this is kind of second round of beekeeping. The timing here is just around the time you're not sure if you could put a box back or not. There's always about 3 or 4 days there where you're like, I don't know what to do. They might make a frame of honey, they might not. I really think we should quit, but I'm also kind of an optimist, so I should probably put a box back. That's the perfect time. Whenever that happens in your area, that's the time to implement this strategy. So you're going to take your full boxes and you're going to put them above a bee escape. Then you're going to take 1 or possibly 2 boxes that you want to have your new hive in. So those are your empty supers. That's your future split. Your queen excluder stays where it was all summer, and your brood chamber and your queen are going to stay in the bottom. And then you're going to go away just as you would if you were just collecting the honey, and you're going to come back and take the honey. So there goes the honey. You can tell I'm clicking my heels, got a big smile on my face. And then some cool evening, maybe it's a bit of a cooler evening, maybe it's a rainy day and you couldn't pull honey. And there's no big rush about this. Could be the same night you pull the honey, could be a week later, doesn't matter. Those bees have come out of those honey supers through the escape, and the ones in the brood chambers, they're all mixed up and they're populating those boxes. And you're just going to grab that box off of that hive and slam it down on a new, I use pallets, but it could be a new bottom board. And I've pre-positioned a pollen patty just to speed things up. I slap those pollen patties down first rather than trying to get them under the lid. And I leave these hive blankets that I use on, then the bees aren't coming up at you as you're moving that box. And then we slap lids on them. Those will then go to a new site. And I've also, in the same operation, added the queen. And that's me, and that's the box flipped up on end, and I give her inside the bottom as if it's the doctor giving you the you've turned 40 checkup. Right up the bottom with the queen. And that way I haven't moved any frames, I haven't had to open anything up the hoop. And the less you disturb things, the more bees are going to stay in that box as you make your truckload of splits, and off you go. So let's think about this list of reasons why this wouldn't work. This workload, now we've got figured out. We can do this as part of our normal operations, plus kind of an after-supper affair. Just as it's cooling down in August, we're talking 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. If you're not moving it too far, it's going to be an easy evening. I like to move these into a northern part of my range, I guess you'd say. So I might be only pulling back in with an empty truck midnight, 1 a.m. But no one's breaking a sweat, no one's breaking a back. This is all pretty easy work. Now, these other problems, what are these hives going to look like? Now, it's too late to make a honey crop objection. You didn't split early. You had this boomer hive that made you a crop all summer, and only after the honey's done are you splitting it. That's how to maximize your crop. And now we're thinking already on the 15th of August, your job isn't this year's honey crop, it's next year's honey crop. And so you didn't split too thin, you've got a good crop this year, and maybe you're going to have a crop again next year, as long as you can get these girls through winter. But maybe it still shouldn't work. But this is what my splits look like a month after. So this is right around the 10th of September. We just hauled these back from the interlake. And you can see that one's a real beauty. I think in the video we were wearing sweaters when we took this video. So it was probably 8 or 10 degrees. And I tipped them up and they didn't fly at all. It was too cool for them to fly. But you can see the cluster size. If you wait 5 or 10 minutes, you leave your hive like that, you get a real good idea what that hive is for strength, because they'll consolidate onto the brood. So this one's really about a 5-frame nuke in a 10-frame box. That one's a boomer, that one's a boomer, this one's probably about a 6 or 7. No problem. All of those I'm anticipating will winter just fine. Now I winter indoors. If I was wintering outdoors, I really shouldn't say, because I don't, I haven't wintered a hive outdoors in 35, 40 years, but you guys would have to judge for yourselves if you think your wintering system would make those hives winter. I know lots of people play around with putting nukes on top of stronger hives, and I encourage you to think about maybe that's a good strategy for you if you're wintering outdoors. If I was really being picky, you'd say, well, that's really a nuke. I should transfer it into a nuke box, but then I just have to transfer it back out again next spring. That's more work than I want to do. So, and in terms of scale, for me, that's me, and I have my friend Sari here, who's a beekeeper from Ukraine, is working for me. He's driving that truck, I'm driving this one. That's 287 nukes we made, and this is when we're bringing them back from up north. This is like that month later. And it was 3 evenings in August that we made those splits. And it was me, Sari, and my nephew Otto, who's 14. And Otto put the pollen patties on in the lids, and Sari and I moved the boxes, and I ran the forklift, and it went pretty smooth. So that's the kind of scale you can bring to making more bees with a little bit of planning. And my dream is that the Manitoba industry adopts this sort of tactic to relieve the pressure on needing bees in the spring. If we all had 10, 15, 20% more hives than we each needed, we can talk to our friends about whether the border should be open or not without anyone getting angry, because we would have enough bees already. Now, some challenges here. I don't want to pretend that this is all a done deal. Not every hive is strong enough to winter outdoors, and I encourage, and let's face it, wintering outdoors is a bigger test of a hive than indoor wintering. You need a real solid unit to make it through a Manitoba winter. And whether combinations of these summertime splits could maintain that. Another thing I would say is not everyone, you guys, when I say, oh yeah, I got an easy loader, you kind of laugh at me because maybe that's a dream that you think is never going to be fulfilled for you. Easy loaders aren't cheap, I know. And by the way, there's a Manitoba version that's going to be on the market soon, about the same price, unfortunately. But there's some handheld devices that do some of the similar work on a smaller scale. So, you know, get your mind thinking about how do I break how do I get out of that trap of it being ceaseless toil to get that honey crop done, so that I can think about beekeeping instead of thinking about just breaking my back. And now I made 287 splits in 3 nights, but now I got 287 more hives to feed, and that's not cheap either, right? So, you know, if I want bees next spring, I got to start spending money on them now, and that's not nothing. So I don't want to pretend that it is. But you guys all know what it costs to get a nuke or a package in the spring. And I think I've got a slide coming up where I've actually worked that out a little bit. I think there's some advantages to doing this, especially if you're a person who would dream of trying to have more of your own stock in your hives, is that you can take some of that summer in July when I'm going to music festivals. If you've got time to raise queens, that's the perfect time to do it. The days are beautiful. You're not trying to put a cell in a tiny little hive in May and have it get to -5 at night and ruin everything. So, like, why don't we do it like California and do our beekeeping when the weather's nice? And if you're making splits in August, then you can make your queens in July. And whether it's, you making the queen, or whether it's someone local who wants to be a queen. And there are people that, and when I was young, I had ambitions of producing queens myself on a commercial scale. Your first batch of queens at the end of May, people will climb over each other to buy. When your next cycle of queens comes available 2 weeks later, no interest, because the splits are already done. And if we want to get away from using stock from other places and use your own stock, making splits at the end of your season is a window to using your own breeding program in a more effective way. And if it turns out you made all those splits and you have a fantastic winter and you never needed them in the first place, that's good news, because you can sell those bees, whether it's one hive or it's 1,000. There'll be someone else who wants to buy them. And then it turns out you can't afford that easy loader, right? You'd only need to make 30 extra hives for 10 years to pay for an easy loader, no problem. I'm not sure if you're laughing at the 10 years or the 30 hives. Here's the numbers. So you got to buy that queen. I rely on mostly local queens. I've got a couple people that I do some myself, and I got a couple guys, sort of semi-cousins of mine in the Brandon area that are able to supply me with queens. Typically prices in the neighborhood of 50 bucks. You're going to have to feed up that hive. I figure that's about 20 bucks a hive. A couple pollen patties at $2 each is 4 bucks. You got to have the box and the lid and the bottom. Now, if you had a couple tough winters, maybe you have extra stuff. Or you can hit a garage sale. That's if you buy everything new from Bee Made today. 182 bucks for a box and frames and foundation, and the lid, the inner cover, and the bottom. But you're going to use that for multiple years, so it's not fair to charge yourself all that at once. So I said, let's take 10% per year, so it's a little under 20 bucks. And not every hive is going to make it through, so let's discount by 10% for the fact that you will lose some. So take 10% off. That means that my cost of that pre-replacement hive is $101.50. Now, who bought packages this spring? Anybody? I'll play Brad's trick. Anyone buy packages this spring? But they were more than $101.50. I can tell you that much. Now, I don't want to talk, I'm not talking smack about anyone either supplying packages or needing packages or selling nukes. I both buy and sell nukes depending on my year. But I'll tell you, I'm not selling a nuke for $101.50, and I'd love to have a cost of $100 to get it through and then sell it for $350 for a good strong single in the spring. That's not bad. That's easy loader money right there. So that's kind of the gist of my presentation. This is kind of a road test. I've been trying to, like Keith said, I'm not an evangelical beekeeper by nature. I've never tried to persuade anyone to be a beekeeper or try to get any beekeeper to change how they do things. But I think at the industry, at the Manitoba Beekeeping Group level, if we all had a few more hives, we could just be a little nicer to each other. It would take the pressure off of where are we going to get bees from in the spring. It's my dream that I'll have 287 extra hives next spring. And if we all did, they wouldn't be 350 bucks, they'd be 200. And that would make us all better off, in my opinion. And then I plan to put that money in the kitty, and then one year I'll have a bad year, and then it won't hurt quite so much because I'll have a bit of reserve. I have had bad winters, don't get me wrong, and that stinks. And this is my attempt to try to get ahead of that problem. I want to have extra hives and a little bit of reserve capital. And this is the process by which I think I can best do that. For sources, for the pollen data, pretty dated journal, but 1940. The weather came from the Manitoba Cooperator. We all know the population model and Randy's graph that I used. And I'd open the floor to questions. Yes?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you consider adding oxalic acid treatment while the split is still moving apart.
Yes. I think some kind of mite treatment while that hive is broodless is a terrific idea. Whether it would be a fumigation when you've got a queen in fresh bees, she's only just started to lay. My hunch is to not mess with that too much. I have, if I think I've got a mite issue, like I'm seeing any mites at all, I would probably put a strip in there, or maybe a thymol treatment that's maybe a little bit more laid back. Blowing something in there. Because you'd have to be effective, it'd have to be in the first 10 days. And that queen is only starting to really get ripping. So but I haven't tried it either. It might find, my nervousness might be completely unwarranted. It's worth a shot.
You use 10% as your discount rate?
Yeah, on the survivability,
Right.
yeah.
Your average?
That's what I've been doing on these for the last 5 years, yeah. Which is better than my production colonies. And they're wintering in the same conditions with the same feed and same mite treatment. So I'm thinking if I'm looking at 15 to 17% for my production colonies, that extra 7% must be queen loss, because these things, whatever's going on with these splits, the queens are all firing on all cylinders. So that first winter, they come through pretty nice. Yes?
The FD that you've got in place, now has that got comb in it, or is it straight foundation?
It would be basically coming out of the back end of the extractor at that time of year. And in fact, my crew, I have them sort so that anything that's got a little color to the frames, I set those aside for my brood chambers. So it's usually a little older, slightly darker frame of wax.
So can you talk about what it takes away from your operation to have that foundation?
Oh, it costs you money to draw foundation.
Replacement, right? You've got 287 hives,
Yeah.
10 combs.
Yep.
So you've got to put that foundation into effect each season.
Yes, totally. I can give you a long answer or a short answer. Which one do you want?
Give us a short.
Okay. So the short answer is I wouldn't register that as a cost until that box either becomes a production hive, in which case it's a deduction on the asset value, or if it dies, it just goes right back into the pile and becomes another box in my operation. So if that hive survives, as I hope it does, instead of it being a cost, I'm taking that it's included in that $100, right? That $100 included the foundation, the frame. Now, it didn't include I think you're saying the cost of drawing the wax, right? Okay, so especially if you're using commercial, I'm not going to talk smack about anyone's product or anything, but my experience is that the wax on foundation that's commercially available is pretty thin. And I actually dip mine own a couple times, so I get a real nice coating of wax on there from my cappings, and then I draw it out, no problem. But that's still, I'm putting about 2 ounces of wax on a sheet. So there's I think it cost me, I forget, it's less than $1, but it's something per sheet. So it's like $10 a hive, $10 a box.
Or what I'm aiming at is the resource it takes to draw from.
Yeah, so the rule of thumb is for every pound of wax, it's going to cost you $5, 5 pounds of honey. Yeah.
So you've got to factor in some honey loss to have your comb ready.
Yep, yep. And that's true whether it's a honey super or a brood chamber. Every box costs you something, absolutely. Yes,
When you first started, you used to pull up brood for
yes.
and then the bees would accumulate over the brood, and you pull the box off as like a brood split. Now you're pulling just the bees itself.
Yeah.
Can you compare the two?
I did, for 2 years, I did side-by-side comparisons, half and half, no difference after a month. And I went, why am I doing that extra work? That's part of that, developing a program that you can scale up. Because pulling that excluder, shaking 3 frames of brood off, and then moving frames around during the honey pull really bogged us down. That was essentially needing an extra person on the honey crew every day. Or if you didn't have that person, then you got half as much done, it seemed. So it was a light bulb moment when I realized I didn't have to do that. After a month, whether that brood had been added or not, didn't seem to make much difference to the population of those hives, and especially made no difference to the winter survivability. If you looked at I had 50 and 50, 50 made up with brood, 50 with no brood. The no broods actually, I think, had 3 or 4 more survive. Was that because I ended up dragging mites along or or just random chance? I don't know. But there was no benefit for a ton of extra work. I had a hand there, and then I'll come back. Yes?
A question about swarming, making splits, and double boxing below just above the excluder for your skateboarding when you're pulling your honey.
Yeah.
Because this year I was short on boxes. I only went 1 box on top of my queen excluder, then my escape.
Yeah.
And I got kind of swarmy.
I imagine.
The first week
Yeah.
after that. Now I'm thinking if I was to pull brood up, like you said, in the first year, but just going home and trying to alleviate the swarming, is that something that kind of, or just double box it for extra?
So we might be talking about 2 different things. Because I put 2 or sometimes 3 boxes the first round. When the honey's coming in like crazy, if you only give 1 empty back and you're not planning to come back to pull that honey stack off for a couple of days, you're going to run out of available room. Can I give you my 5-minute pitch on swarm control? People talk about a box of honey being full, but think about the individual cell. When you put that empty super on that hive and you shake it, it weighs hardly anything. Think about how much honey you could fill. But when that first rush of nectar comes in, those frames are essentially thousands and thousands of jars of honey. There's only one problem. They're all on their sides. Every bee can put 1 drop of honey in every cell. And then that box is full until that honey is dried down. So what makes a full box of honey is dependent on how long that box is in, how much that honey's dried down. So you're thinking, they could put 60 pounds of honey in this stupid box. Why is it not enough? Because after 1 day full of fresh nectar, it's full. So until they have a chance to dry that down, your honey supers are not only storage for honey, they are the curing process. They're the grain dryer in your operation. It's not full until it's dried down, and it's a great big radiator. And if you've got 100,000 bees hauling in a crop off of a canola field, and it's all they can do just to fly for 16 hours, even if there's only 10 pounds of nectar in that box, it's full. So you got to think about how much space will my bees need to dry that honey down. And for the same, your question about foundation is not enough to even hold the one little drop. And so just even though that foundation, when that box is full, will be 60 pounds of honey plus the 5 pounds of honey to make the wax in it, but it has to do its job first, and so it fills up much earlier than you think. So you're thinking about swarm control, you need about 3 times as many boxes as you think. If you think it needs 1, it really needs 3. If you think it needs 3, it really needs 9. And that's why you end up looking like that, right? And those were heavy. Like when we pulled those off, my truck would just... Okay, so that's you're good there. I'll come back to here. Sorry, I put off your question.
That's okay. I just was curious to know what percentage of bees are you taking off then when you do that split? So you've got 3 boxes above the super.
Yeah.
And of those 3, you take 1.
Typically take the top one off.
Take the
Yeah.
top one. So what's the split, or what's the percentage of bees that you're taking away from there?
It's probably about a third.
Third?
Because typically every box has as many bees as that box will hold, and then they're out the front, the rest of them, if it's a warm night. Yeah, and I usually sometimes have to smoke them a bit to get them to go in. So and my fear was always that, well, these are going to be old bees, because wouldn't all the young bees be around the brood? So I think they mix it up. Yeah. They're not stratified in that hive by age or anything.
They'll take over other jobs if they have to.
Yeah, the labor gets redistributed a little bit, and I think that turns out not an issue for whatever reason, right? Sometimes you try something and it works, even though everything every beekeeper's ever told you says it shouldn't work. When you actually try it, it works, and good to know, right? Yeah. Yes?
How late in the year can you push it? Or have you pushed it?
So the latest I did was 28th of August last year. Bee-Mate phoned me up and said, we got some queens here, and you're the only one that's buying them, so do you want them or not? And they're half price. Okay. So I did 100, this is 2022. On the 28th of August, they did just fine.
And you're just giving them honey frames? You're not giving them brood frames?
It's whatever I got. I mean, I didn't have enough. Some of those were pretty nice honey, nice white wax, because I'd ran out of dark comb. And this, I mean, I'm at a spot now after quite a few. I've had some tough winters, and I had probably more dark comb for brood chambers than I really needed. And now I'm like, fresh foundation. Well, I'll just make a hive out of it, because I've got more hives than I've ever had. It's actually a little concerning. I went and bought a second extractor a couple days ago, because I'm like, I don't know if we ran full bore all summer this year, and just got, I think my high schoolers were going back to school the next day. And we finished, I think, about 15 minutes early, the last load of honey. So if I'm going to keep expanding, and this gives me, like, my limiting factor now is, like, how many bottom boards can I make this year? Like, how far, like, I don't know how far a guy could push this. Like, if I wanted to make 1,000 extra hives, I could. But I need to have the bottom. I know you have when you're talking those kind of numbers, you gotta have it all made up in advance. You can't suddenly say, oh, I had a great idea. I hope there's 1,000 queens lying around on the 15th of August, right? You'd have to have your lids, your bottoms, your boxes, your queens, everything lined up. well ahead of time. But I'm telling you, whether you're making, start with one, just do one, right? And see if it works for you. And if it does, then scale it up to, if you made one more split every year, you'd be bigger than Ian in just a few years, right? That's how compound interest works.
Thanks, Phil. They told me this worked. Thanks, Phil.
Okay.
This presentation brought to you by EasyLoader. EasyLoader. Financing available.
This is embarrassing. I just bought another one of those too. So I now have 3.
That happens to be in old cars. If anybody's gonna buy
Well, old cars probably depreciate less than easy loaders, but not much.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. You did a quick cost-benefit analysis between EasyLoader and Grandchild.
Yeah.
Did you factor in depreciability of the Grandchild, or is that just for the EasyLoader car?
I did not include depreciation on the Grandchild.
You'll have to go back.
You'd have to ask my grandmother's no longer with us, but you'd have to ask her about whether her cost benefit on me was worth it or not.
EasyLoader worthy.
Yeah.
On the concern about, the question is indoors or outdoors, and we all know that most smaller beekeepers will be wintering outdoors. I just wanted to throw it out that you want to try something like this, and I have it suggested. If you want to winter a hive or 2 indoors, call up your local person who winters indoors. If you called up Phil, I'm sure, and said, I got 2 of these I want to try, can I put it in the corner of your building?
2 maybe, but I've been gradually kicking people out because I used to be able to winter about 5 people. I'm down to 2 kind of guess at the moment. But next summer, if you make your 1 test, I'll winter it for you.
There you go, there's the offer. So yeah, just throwing it out there, you're gonna have to ask.
Yeah.
How many beekeepers times 1?
What's that?
First come, first
One
served.
beekeeper?
Yeah.
400 beekeepers times 1.
How many beekeepers times 1?
Well, I'm looking at this room. This is a limited time offer, only for people present tonight.
And the YouTube audience home.
And I know that the 2 of you aren't going to take me up on it. So, yeah.
So yeah, in all seriousness, I know a lot of people, you have 1, 2, 5 colonies. You want to try this, you want to make a couple of these splits, and you're worried about wintering. It doesn't hurt to ask. You may get turned down, and Phil may say, sorry, shed's full. You may call a guy and say, can you put 2 in your building? Well, yeah, and just put them in the corners. So it's, there are options. There are ways forward with it. So I didn't want to end the Q&A. I'm not sure if this thing's going to explode or not, but I think it's time to thank Phil and go to coffee. I'm sure Phil is going to stay for coffee and answer your questions personally. Thanks, Phil.